Who was crazy until they were right all along? His equations and formulas explain the physical properties of matter, but as it went against the then accepted laws of physics, he was ridiculed and ignored for years while fighting for atom theory to be accepted. He took his own life just 3 years before Ernest Rutherford discovered the nucleus of an atom, proving Boltzmann's theory. That dude who suggested that it might be a good idea to wash your hands before performing surgery. Hemingway, before he took his own life, he became extremely paranoid the FBI was following him. His wife and people around him just thought he was mentally ill and grew deeply concerned. Hemingway went as far as getting electrotherapy at a psychiatric hospital to try and help with the perceived delusions. Turns out the FBI had been following and bugging him for years, according to declassified files. Harry Markopolos spent 10 years trying to convince everyone, investors, journalists, regulatory agencies, etc., that Bernie Madoff was a fraud based on forensic accounting. Madoff was one of the most respected names on Wall Street, and despite the overwhelming evidence, no one was willing to entertain the thought he might be running a Ponzi scheme. Harry's book, No One Would Listen, is a pretty great account of financial detective work and just the abject frustration of being absolutely certain you're right but no one believes you. Edit. If you want to see Congressman Ackerman absolutely destroy the SEC right after Markopolos' testimony, here you go. In the days of landlines, my phone was tapped. I could hear a strange hollow sound and I knew someone was listening. I had had a bad accident, was home for almost a year and involved in a lawsuit. I told my attorney about it. He told me the insurance company wouldn't bother. I mentioned it to my roommate. She told me I was crazy. I began to notice a van parked on my street. It was there for several days. I thought I was under surveillance. My attorney and my roommate said I was crazy. A person came to my door asking questions about the neighborhood. They claimed to be from a real estate company. They didn't go to other houses. I thought I was being watched. My attorney and my roommate said I was crazy. Several weeks later, my roommate's boyfriend was arrested for stealing physical and intellectual property from IBM. It was the beginning of the tech era and he stole millions in hardware and software and ideas. We were being watched to see if we were involved. The phone was tapped. We were under surveillance. We were tapped. I wasn't crazy after all. The dingo ate my baby lady got made fun of constantly, most notably in Seinfeld, and I believe went to jail because nobody believed her. Turns out a dingo ate her baby. She is still made fun of. Courtney Love was warning everyone about Harvey Weinstein back in the mid-90s, but everyone just wrote her off. If you're a woman in this industry and Weinstein invites you to one of his parties, don't go. For a very long time, the medical community thought that stomach ulcers were caused by stress. A doctor in Australia called Barry Marshall claimed they were wrong and that they were caused by an excess of certain bacteria, and the cure was simple antibiotics. The medical community ridiculed him and nearly ended his career. He eventually decided the only way to prove he was right was to infect himself, develop the ulcers, and cure himself. In curing himself, he was proved right and won the Nobel Prize for his efforts. And now stomach ulcers are very easily treatable. They previously affected 1 in 10 people. The fan that predicted the show's How I Met Your Mother message and was shamed, only to be completely right in the end. Jon Snow, yes, that's his name, was laughed at for believing that the multiple cholera outbreaks could be traced back to a specific source and that it was due to contaminated water, essentially making him one of the fathers of epidemiology. He has a fascinating life that went beyond that as well. When the Civil War broke out, everyone on both sides thought it would be a quick victory. However, Sherman kept saying it would be a bloodbath that would drag on for years. His superiors decided he was insane and sent him out west to fight Indians, Native Americans, just to get rid of him. After it all came true and they needed some better generals, they said maybe we should bring back that Sherman guy. Martha Mitchell, she was the wife of Nixon's AG John Mitchell. She was outspoken in the extreme and was one of the first to openly talk about what really happened, re Watergate. Since she was also known to love her martinis, she was widely written off as a drunk, crazy woman. Behind the scenes, a White House doctor began heavily sedating her and her husband locked her away from the press. No one believed her until Nixon resigned and the story came out. To this day, most people only remember her as that loudmouth Martha Mitchell. The Radium Girls. When radium had just come to the US and was being marketed on dials for war and watches, girls used their lips to fix the paintbrushes to make their numbers and dials perfect. Eventually they started suffering horrible, painful experiences due to the radium. These girls fought for years to figure out A, what was wrong with them, B, who was responsible, and C, how they were going to pay their bills / support their families. It's a horrible injustice. These girls needed support and validation that they weren't crazy, that it was radium, and it took far too long and too many deaths for it to happen. When I was in Boy Scout camp, we had this counsellor named Don. He was kind of odd. He knew everything about trees and only really talked about trees. We had just gotten back from a hike that Don was on with us, and we were just sitting around talking, and he suddenly goes, "You know, they're going to let girls into Boy Scouts soon." We were like, "Yeah, okay Don," but sure enough, less than 3 years later, they did it. The ex-husband of my ex-girlfriend, turns out he wasn't the crazy one after all. He kept trying to tell me, and if I would have listened from the beginning, I could have saved 4 years of my life. Courtney Love and her quip about Weinstein. Johnny Rotten said in an interview that he knew Jimmy Savile was into all kinds of seediness. People dismissed it as typical Johnny Rotten anti-establishment talk, for which he is famous. As it turned out, he was right. Yeah, I know, Piers Morgan. The classic example, of course, is Cassandra. In Greek mythology, she was cursed to know the future, but for no one to believe her when she told them. The people who discovered prions. All the other biologists thought they were crazy to suggest one protein could be an infectious agent. Nope, those biologists were wrong and Nobel Prizes were awarded. Jose Canseco, he revealed that a bunch of baseball players, Mark McGwire, Rafael Palmeiro, were doing steroids. No one believed him for years, until everyone else got caught doing steroids. Me, about my now disowned cousin. He kept stealing things from me, which my family felt was no big deal, but it escalated. It went from stealing candy to my things to cash, and after that I asked them how much longer they would support him and call me selfish for not sharing. The line was finally crossed when he stole our grandmother's credit cards and her car. She finally wrote him off. This was after he had stolen all of her jewellery, including the last present anniversary ring my grandfather was ever to give her. Oh, but he tried to say that our family kicked him out because he's gay. No. None of us cared about that. It was because he's a thief. His friends have bailed him out of jail and then dropped him when he steals from them, but he claims the world is just unfair to him. Now he tells his pity story and milks the "my family disowned me because I'm gay" to everyone he begs from. I learned this when he tried to do it to one of my friends. Winston Churchill. He was very much out of favour at the time that he began warning about government rearmament. In the first volume of his retrospective on the Second World War, he is emphatic that it was history's most unnecessary and preventable war. About 10 years ago, there was this stoner who always hung around the shop that I played Magic at. One day, he told me that he didn't trust Jared from Subway. I said that there was nothing to worry about and that the only thing that Jared did was eat sandwiches. He said that there was something really sinister about Jared and that he could just tell by looking at him. That one journalist, Gary Webb, that uncovered the truth that the CIA aided and abetted Nicaraguan Contra rebels in funneling cocaine into inner city communities. Johnny Rotten and Jerry Sadowitz both openly accused Jimmy Savile of paedophilia long before anyone took it seriously. Both basically ended up blacklisted in the UK. My mum, turns out being emo really was just a phase. The people who said the government was spying on its citizens. Corey Feldman. Dude went on national TV to tell everyone that there was a network of sexual abusers in Hollywood and that he himself had been abused, and people laughed at him and shunned him. And then it came out that pretty much everything he was saying was true. The people who were tortured as part of MK Ultra. Imagine trying to convince the people around you that the government is trying to make you crazy with mind control, only years later to find out that not only was it true, but you wouldn't get compensation for it. And you were subject to illegal human experimentation. The doctor who found COVID in China and was silenced and died in prison from COVID. My tattoo artist, not a DT follower, who during a 6-hour session described to me what exactly would happen if Biden won, but not by a landslide. I thought he was embracing a doomsday mentality. Every word was correct. Me, when nobody believed me when I said a cat broke into the house. No mother, uncle or cousin believed me. Even I questioned if I just hallucinated it. Turns out I was right when I heard my cousin screaming, finding her standing on a chair while looking like she saw her life flash before her eyes. Suzanne Simard discovered that trees not only communicate with each other, but will lend a tree in distress resources. People thought that was crazy talk for a long time. My dad. He was a UK policeman in the 80s and 90s who would rant for hours about Asian paedophile gangs, and it's all being covered up because nobody wants to deal with it. And I mostly assumed he was just being racist. Edit for clarification, he is regularly racist. And then the Rotherham scandal hit the papers. He was right. Cassandra of Troy was pretty spot on. Sinead O'Connor, people got big mad about her ripping up that picture of the Pope, but she was right. One of our D&D party members was hiding in a tree when the rest of the party was trying to negotiate, and we got captured except the one in a tree. Known serial abuser on YouTube, Onision, had long accused Shane Dawson of being inappropriate with children. Obviously, he was not listened to because he himself married a 17-year-old and continued to groom other girls with his husband. He eventually recanted his statement and apologized, but a few years after that it turned out Dawson had done a lot of inappropriate things towards children and sexualized them frequently, at which point Onision said, "See, I was right all along." Crazy stuff. Niki Lauda predicting Lewis Hamilton's transfer from McLaren to Mercedes F1 will be a good decision. Ended up winning 6 championships in Mercedes alone and counting. My friend who said the coronavirus was going to be a bigger deal than we all thought it would be in March. Working at a psychiatric hospital, I once heard about a guy claiming he was a secret agent on a covert mission to stop a potential terrorist attack. He didn't elaborate any more than that, and they thought he was psychotic. Loaded him with antipsychotics, basically turning him into a zombie. About a week later, a bunch of black suits come in, flashing their badges, says his story checks out, and took him with them. I kept telling people that Apple deliberately sabotages their phones to stop working over time via their updates, and that it doesn't matter if you reject the update, it'll happen anyway. Lo and behold, Apple was caught out using planned obsolescence via updates to sabotage their own phones to twist its customers' arms into buying a new one. They said I was being paranoid. Well, who's paranoid now, Laura? Who's paranoid now?